Welcome to the podcast. In this episode, built with MongoDB, we're talking with Mark Hosking, who is the CEO of Formbird. Formbird is what you might describe as a low-code, no-code solution, but I think that might sell it a bit short. It offers really amazing flexibility and power, even beyond what you might think of as a traditional low-code, no-code solution. We have a great discussion about how Mark is leveraging MongoDB, not only for the stack. Formbird allows you to create applications and stores that configuration code inside MongoDB, but it also gives you, the developer, the ability to leverage MongoDB as a part of your user data. Really powerful platform. Mark's a really interesting guy, has amazing breadth of talent. Here's a CEO that has the ability to talk very technically, at great technical depth about how the product was built. So I had a wonderful conversation. Nick and I really enjoyed having him on the podcast. I hope you enjoy the episode as well.
You're listening to the MongoDB Podcast. MongoDB Podcast? Exploring the world of software development, data, and all things MongoDB. And now your hosts, Michael Lynn and Nic Raboy.
How are you today?
Oh, thanks, guys. Great. It's great to join you guys on MongoDB. Fantastic.
For the audience, would you introduce yourself? Who are you and what do you do?
Well, my name's Mark Hosking. I run an organization, a company called Formbird. We're a low-code, no-code application platform. Historically, I started as electrical engineer back in the good old days, but have been in the technology game for way too long, starting with developing on Z80 processors and machine code assembler.
I'm excited to talk about Formbird and learn about how this product came to be. You mentioned low code, no code. I want to get into that and exactly what that means. But before we go there, tell me about how this product came to be. How was it built?
Okay, so I've been involved in building enterprise solutions basically all my career. The problem has been is the cost of development and the cost of delivery has always been incredibly high. And if you follow the traditional waterfall development cycle, it has often led to many failures. So the cost of development has always been a big issue. And then the problem for me has always been that if you have a low code or a rapid application development environment that we've seen over many years, whether it be Oracle Forms, Progress, Lotus Notes, Microsoft Access, they'd always live within a garden that was very restrictive on capability and scalability. So the principles were that we started in the asset management and works management space. And works management really requires a very close molding with the organization's operational requirements. And therefore, it's very unique to that organization. So you inherently end up building unique solutions. That then lends itself to the issue of how do you deliver cost effectively and in a timely manner solutions. Originally, we actually started with a .NET kind of architecture. There was a sort of Formbird version 1.0. And this was back in early 2000. And at that stage, we had a mobile product that was running across radio networks prior to any of the 3G or 2G networks. And that really was the first genesis of the requirements, if you like. But even then, it still required very heavy-duty development. The evolution of and the event of technologies in the web environment really let us take components, web components, things like MongoDB, to then really build out a framework that really enabled us to deliver rapidly business solutions.
So did you start with the product leveraging a relational technology rather than a document-oriented solution?
Yes, back in 2001, 2, when we started the construct of our mobile solution, that was all on a SQL Oracle construct, so it was all relational based. We'd spend half our life data modeling, and this was always the greatest challenge: is what does a data model represent? And from our point of view, or from my point of view, you'd always model an environment, and it was always from one perspective. It might be from the finance perspective or from the operational perspective. But as soon as someone wanted to introduce a change to their business, the model would often collapse in one form or another. So we started, yes, on a relational environment. The actual Formbird itself, it was a complete clean slate. There was no code that came across. The previous architecture of our technology was Oracle SQL Server backend. In fact, we had a Java middle layer and then a .NET front end. We were very nervous on the front end because the history of Microsoft is to switch out your front ends on you. So we try to minimize our business and application code within the Java stack. Then really as the JavaScript and we decided that we really need a new construct, that's when we took the brave move and really looked at the mean stack, and that really was the starting point back in 2017.
The what stack?
The mean stack.
Oh, the mean stack. All right, so got it.
I'm wondering if the vision for Formbird has changed over time. It sounded like the initial vision was really to enable agility and rapid application development for not necessarily people that are writing hardcore code, but maybe even folks that are using low code, no code. Has the vision for the product changed much over time?
The vision for Formbird hasn't changed. The original documentation and design was really based on that historic requirement building. What has changed, I suppose, was our go-to-market. What we quickly discovered is we built a very solid framework that really meant that we could put together these applications quickly. But what we were finding was very difficult to educate the market on the capabilities. So what has changed is our go-to-market strategy, which really has meant that we are now building more applications on our own platform and meeting one of the key objectives. And one of those key objectives we placed on ourselves was that even though it was a low-code, no-code, we didn't want the results to be a very simplified forms tool. So the end results had to be products that were competitive against vertically built or dedicated coded applications. So we wanted solutions. We didn't want to compromise on the user experience, performance, or general capabilities. And therefore, we wanted a technology platform that would then compete on people developing solutions on the raw .NET, Node.js, or what have you. So we didn't want to compromise on that. So one of the guiding principles is for us to minimize the gap between the developer and the capabilities. So I have a very simple principle, which is less is more. The less we interrupt, the more we can provide. So the less parameters in the solution that really, sometimes people would call those features, often become a limiting factor on the other end. So for an example, if I was to place a restriction that the solution had 10 security levels, well, that is actually a restriction. So we actually have used many of the principles from the Unix operating system, which really says every application or Formbird itself is built on itself. So it has a few guiding constructs that give developers and implementers the total freedom to really build out whatever part of that model they can. So what has changed is we are now building a number of vertical applications, which we're now finding successfully using to market the capabilities of the technology, but they are themselves are now entering the market as successful vertical applications.
Yeah, so you said that you're using Formbird for your own applications, right? I got that correctly. And then you mentioned that this is a low code, no code solution. So I'm assuming that developers have the option to add some code to their applications. What are the supported languages or the supported stacks that developers can use when adding upon Formbird?
Okay, so that's a great question, Nick. So part of the approach was really to become a container for the modern architecture. So again, in not interrupting the capabilities or the ability for a developer to embrace the sort of modern architecture, we really become a container for the component model. So whether they be React components, Angular components, or Vue components, we inherently can leverage almost a 100% native component within the application. So we really then form the application layer between the front end components and the database itself. So we can provide all of the security model, the business logic, and everything else, and it all sits within the very standard construct of JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and the components. So really, we're very much able to leverage any modern component. So our developers and our partners are often pulling, whether it be Chart.js or DS.js or any of those elements, and really able to very rapidly form a front-end component that just drops straight in and then binds to the data and the database itself. So MongoDB then gets bound to it with all of the application layer between it.
That sounds great. I worked on a similar system concept way back in the 90s, and there was this concept of modules that you could plug in. So it's theoretically possible then for developers to work in multiple languages to build a complete solution using Formbird, right?
In many ways, the beauty is taking that component model, particularly you're looking at the React from Facebook, Angular from Google, and really being able to plug and play off quite diverse sets of libraries. And there's both the massive open source community that can provide those, but there's also a number of commercial, whether they be Gantt charts, whether they be various graphics, and a component on a Formbird form can be as little as a single text box to really consuming the entire form. And you can drive that entire environment with your own CSS, your own HTML, but you can also build a form without a single line of code and really just using a very simple JSON document to cut and paste. So what we've been able to achieve is the ability to really throw up a form within quite literally minutes. The business is able to cycle through the requirements through a live environment. We don't develop documentation, we develop applications. And it really is, which we follow the MongoDB principle of MongoDB makes databases simple, Formbird makes applications simple. So app development, we follow 100% the Google progressive design. So if you understand the progressive requirements, there's about 17 requirements within that stack. And we pretty much follow every single one of those, including the capability of going and operating offline. That capability, we store the data within IndexedDB, and with TrueType and the ability to run native apps, we can now compile to a native app as well. But the applications themselves are 100% stored within MongoDB, so it's a 100% data-driven application, although the components themselves can come from CDNs or what have you. So they can be built using Visual Studio Code or whatever development tool you wish, placed within the environment, and therefore you can separate your sort of core hard developers using JavaScript, HTML, and CSS to your business developers or business implementers. And our best developers these days are in fact our business analysts.
One of the things that has been a challenge for some systems like this is source code control. Does Formbird work with, let's say, GitHub? Like, how do you implement source code control in your application development lifecycle?
Well, that's a really good question, Michael. It's really broken up. The components themselves operate as web components, so they can fully leverage GitHub, Bitbucket, whatever you like, to manage that actual component. Once it sits within our database, because it's within the database itself and it's data driven, we run total versioning. So there's no such thing as delete or update of a document. We version absolutely everything. And therefore, as the application is built within the database, our version management is actually through MongoDB movement of data. And we still run the traditional stack of, for our larger enterprise customers who don't want to be interacting with a live environment, they will run through a dev, test, UAT, prod migration. But rather than migrating code through standard branching and Git, we're using MongoDB queries. So we're pulling out based on sets, based on what's changed, based on a module that wants to be moved, and really just exporting and importing into the other environments.
So that can be a challenge for folks that are used to
to that GitHub lifecycle where you you git clone, you make your changes, and you get push. I'm imagining that you've got uh, some type of integration with a source code so that developers can continue to use that kind of methodology.
It really is all contained within. It is that split. The components themselves follow that methodology because there is code involved in that. Really, on our low code, no code side within the framework, it's really not required because it's not a single stack of code. We run what we call the core technology, and then the JavaScript actually sits on top, more like a macro language. So it's far more like Excel and a spreadsheet. But what we're doing is we're actually leveraging the native languages. So rather than having our own VBA or having our own construct, we 100% leverage the JavaScript and HTML and CSS within the application. So that becomes our macro language. But then if someone wants to branch out and do something, I suppose, more sophisticated, more interactive, or more, whatever it is, leverage third-party libraries, that's where they then jump to a React component or an Angular component, and they're really then using that full source control and manage. But then you have the BA who wants to throw that component up on a form. They'll define the parameters, what's being called the driving parameters, and that'll be dropped onto a form with a small piece of JSON.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is it's a bit of a hybrid. You can still support for individual component context. You can support developers leveraging their source code repositories and then integrate those into the final solution. And then Formbird will have its own versioning system built in so that the components that BAs are maintaining can live right alongside those additional components. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you can sort of think of it as you've got the metadata and the definition of what we call a template. A template defines the form. The template contains components. Those components are referring out to one of the web components, and those web components can be located anywhere. They can be located on the server itself, on a CDN. It's just web referenced. Once it's loaded, it'll actually get cached within the Formbird server, so there's no delay by having to go back out to that CDN or that environment. And the developers, so there's a real sort of there's a two or three tiers within the architecture. There's the front end configuration and building, which, like I said, there's really no limitation. You throw the components down, you define its functional behavior, you build and use JavaScript to do onload rules, on form change or field change rules, pre-save, post-save, and then we have back-end events as well, and pre-save and post-save events on the server. They all have RESTful integration points. The user on the back end is the same as the user on the front end, so integration is very powerful and easy, and really gives you a very open RESTful API into that environment. So then we've got the middle, if you like, in terms of the more technical, and then you're dropping down now to those component builders. And really, we're still not then down to the bottom, which is the core, what we call the core of the technology, which is the Excel or what have you. And then we have MongoDB, which is driving that whole environment and providing us the raw data source, and we place that application overlay it.
I would actually be interested in diving in deeper into how you're using MongoDB, because it sounds like it plays a very heavy role in what Formbird offers. So, for example, at Formbird, are you using MongoDB Atlas, or are you running on-prem instances of MongoDB?
Great point. We actually using both, Nick, and we're moving more to MongoDB Atlas. We see that as an exciting opportunity. When we started back in 2017, obviously at MongoDB Atlas was simply not available. So that was not our starting point. So it has been on-prem, and on-prem has been really within our server stack because we run as a SaaS construct even for all our existing customers. But moving forward, we're providing the opportunity for our customers to move to MongoDB Atlas, reducing that workload from our point of view and our scalability through MongoDB Atlas. It also provides us, I think, with a great opportunity. We see it as a fantastic opportunity where people can actually access and manage and control their raw data the way they wish to, with largely no knowledge. Well, we have no knowledge of their environment. So from a security and access point of view, that is their data and they're accessing it. When they fire up a Formbird server, the server fires up, connects to MongoDB Atlas, and then provides a front end. So then you end up with really the best of both worlds. You've got the low code, no code, but full access and full control to MongoDB Atlas. The files, for instance, for images, for taking photos or loading files, can then be also stored either within our own environment, and people can get SCP, FTP access to those files, or again, back up into things like into AWS S3 storage.
So when somebody starts developing applications with Formbird, are they using a shared MongoDB instance with all other users of Formbird, or are they getting their own kind of database or collection or cluster? Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Okay. We actually run both. So some of our customers are running their own complete VM, which is the full stack. So we run MongoDB, Formbird. We leverage, for instance, Redis for some of the high performance caching and distribution. We've got obviously Node running on that because we're fundamentally a Node app. And then we have we're just actually transitioning at this point in time to a container environment. So we're using LXD, LXC containers using a shared MongoDB cluster, running a sharded cluster environment in that. But still, some customers really want their own controlled VM, in which case, and some of those are actually coming through using a layer 2 connection into their organization if they consider themselves as, either for security purposes or access or whatever they feel they need. As I said, going forward, we're actually now in the process of moving to a Kubernetes serverless environment where really what we will be managing is purely that Formbird application in its own right. And we see MongoDB Atlas as being our data store. And therefore, people can really just say, right, I'm going to connect this application to this MongoDB and fire it up.
And you mentioned that you handle all of the versioning of the components in MongoDB. So I'm curious, how many versions do you go through in a typical amount of time? And what does that look like from a scaling perspective? Do you find yourself having to scale frequently?
It's surprisingly, we have part of the architecture also is actually allowing, we're building out our IoT capabilities as well. We actually have one of the capabilities of the Formbird platform is the ability actually for the front end to talk to multiple MongoDB sources. So one of our applications is for vehicle tracking, but it's actually part of our general IoT strategy. So we actually have a customer now implementing smart meters for smart water meters, and really bringing, from our point of view, IoT is bringing data together. So where I'm heading with this is the scalability factor. So one of our customers, for instance, it's not ginormous by any stretch of the imagination, but they're still doing probably about 1 million transactions a day. On the general business application, it's surprising how few. One of our larger water utility customers have about 300, 400 users. They're probably up to 7-8 million documents over 2-3 years, even though every single document is versioned on every single event. If you're creating 40, 50, 60,000 documents that are operational documents, whether they be service requests or work orders or what have you, each would go through, say, 5 or 10 or 20 different versions. And MongoDB, it really is a whisper of effort to achieve, to manage that sort of volume. Volume has really not been an issue whatsoever, even with that. And that's part of the capability of MongoDB that we just love, is that scalability. And look, the heart of Formbird wouldn't exist without MongoDB, to be honest. And it did take us a couple of years to understand that flexible model. Really, we've almost thrown away the whole concept of data modeling. And this is what we've really been able to enable our designers and application designers. I was talking to a customer yesterday about this, and what it has done is, even though it's simplified the development process, what it actually has meant is that the complexity or the sophistication of the applications can now be much greater. Because you've reduced the complexity on one side, it actually gives you far greater capability on the other side. So our applications are becoming far richer and far broader than what we ever could have achieved with when we were using a relational model. I call it the stack of cards, or the house of cards. We used to model up to such a great degree and we'd have, almost this enterprise model. But then someone would come along and want to change one of the key relationships. And often the stack would almost fall apart, because at that point you're trying to pull out the card and change a serious conceptual relationship, and that would throw it out. But with the document model and MongoDB supporting that document model, you really throw it all out, because now you're dealing with simple properties, and you're really talking about developing relationships between individual properties, between individual documents. So it's infinitely relational. I've had many arguments, particularly in the early days, with designers and with DBAs. I did spend 25 years in that DBA space, so it's not that I haven't had any experience in that. And many people couldn't get it. You'd jump online, you'd see this abuse about MongoDB not supporting relational constructs. Well, I actually argue that MongoDB supports infinite relationships, because you really are now focusing purely on the property and the relationship between those properties, and they are dynamic. So as the organization changes or discovers new relationships, it's far more important now to look at your thesaurus of terms. So if you want a term within the organization like status or name or something like that, it's to be consistent on that individual property, because then when you're defining an entity, you're now really defining an entity with multiple properties. What you don't want to have is work order status or person status or something else. You want just the word status, because as soon as you do that, that becomes a common join between multiple documents or multiple entity types. So if I've got a person and a work order and an invoice, and I have the term status on it, instantly I can drill down on all of those with one of my queries saying, can I have a status of new or open or available? And then I don't care what it's going to hit. And that's incredibly powerful if you get your thesaurus right. So now we spend all our time just saying, again, following our principle, less is more. Keep your thesaurus down. But that really does mean that anyone can be a data modeler.
I love that concept, and we've taken to using the term tabular to describe formerly known as relational database management systems, because the term relational really doesn't do a good job of describing the capabilities. So we refer to formerly relational databases as tabular, and MongoDB as relational or document based. And I love that. So I'm curious though about Formbird. What does I'll use the word data model. I know that you don't want to use that, but what does the data model look like in terms of the number of collections that you have?
A great question, Mike. We actually have one collection. We use principally one collection for an application. This is actually a key capability that really lets us provide a totally vertical solution. In the end, this is again reducing the stress and workload on that data modeling issue, because what we do is I think I sort of touched on the point where we followed in fact the Unix or Linux model. So if you look at Unix as an operating system, it has a very small core that has some very small very key capabilities. But then if you look at the file and the file system itself, it has a set of parameters which gives it the properties of that file. So what we've done is we basically tag every single document with a controlled subdocument. So we call it our system header. And that system header drives all of the properties that enables that document to be known to the Formbird application or platform itself. And they drive the security, they drive the versions, they drive, and again, it maintains it's a very, very small lump. The rest of the document is up to the designer or your user. So there's total freedom of what you do below that, whether it be specific data for the application or not. It could be invisible to us as far as we care. So it really, there is not really a data model. Again, it comes back to we've reduced that demand down to an absolute minimum, which then gives ultimate flexibility. We have a couple of people in the US developing a dating application. We've got partners developing in the asset and works. We've got partners developing in IoT and what have you. So we don't put any constraints. So there's no starting point. The starting point is really a set of control properties which really control that document and put a layer over the top of that. The flexibility then comes is, how do I want to express the rest of that document?
So you mentioned several go-to-market strategies, some industry-aligned applications that you've developed. What what is the percentage maybe of revenue or of effort in the company? What does that look like distributed across those various go-to-market strategies? How big is the Formbird engine in terms of revenue or sales versus the industry-aligned solutions?
Yeah, good question. It's actually this is where we're really pushing that migration from. At the moment, it's 80-20, if you like, in terms of the platform itself and our industry solutions. But the solutions are now starting to drive the uplift of the actual platform and just leveraging the platform itself. So we would have 10 or 15 partners in the process of developing various applications, whether it be a consulting type thing or a vertical or even just a customer implementing their own solutions. Our own applications have really been focused in where our business expertise has historically come from, and that's been an asset and works management. So we have a fleet management application, which really covers all of the requirements of managing a fleet of vehicles. We're actually in the process of also releasing a service, Fleet as a Service, which is really looking at fleet management, which is really a combination of the sort of lease and financing of vehicles, as well as the whole fleet management side, which really is talking about the whole process of managing a vehicle, from end to end, the service regime, the maintenance regime, the responsibility, and all of the rest of it. Is what the application is doing on top of the, if you like, the simple financial and management of it all. We also have a works and asset management in the water utility space, and that's very geospatial. So that really is looking at both the above ground and below ground assets of water utilities, and we're using open layers and Google and what have you to present the geospatial data. Our largest customer there have got about nearly 2 million assets, and that's really covers all their underground pipes, their above ground assets, their treatment plants, their what have you. In fact, in that organisation, in almost all our organisations, we're the only environment that brings all of their assets together in one location. Traditionally, in those sort of environments, you'll have a GIS solution which maintains the raw geospatial data, and then you might have an asset management solution that or a financial solution that maintains the above ground. We, in all our sites, we're the only environment that actually has both, because staff are going out to manage it. And in those environments, we're actually doing complete end-to-end. So from call taker to dispatcher to field crew, back into the asset owners, doing asset planning, doing maintenance schedules and all the rest of it, managing their contracts. It's actually, a number of our customers do the contract management as well, because they outsource much of those processes within that one environment. But this really comes back to, again, that fantastic flexibility of the MongoDB document model, and our scalability there is that we term it vertical scalability and horizontal scalability. So vertical scalability, we refer to the capability of the front end and UI, and really the unlimited term of what you can potentially present to a user and interact with the user, and horizontal being the business function, really the ability just to keep adding on and adding on and adding on. We also have the concept of, I said we put all our applications within one collection. Sorry, just went blank there. Within one collection. But we also have the ability to have multiple applications working together and cross-sharing data with the same security model. So that really then means that you can have different costings of applications. In many businesses, you'll see that the cost of one application, and when I'm talking about cost, is kind of the importance of that application. Our works management within the water utility is controlling and managing 300 or 400 staff, and it's 24/7. And if it goes down for 5 minutes, they're screaming. So the cost and management of that is very tight. It's very traditionally release managed, lots of UAT testing, lots of process management in terms of the application. But that still doesn't stop an organization requiring that little access database or spreadsheet or what have you. So our ability to run multiple Formbird applications, sharing data across applications, really lets an organization therefore have their big enterprise applications, then maybe multiple smaller applications, or multiple large applications that can share and cross-share data, but they may have different security requirements in terms of access relationships between the user and the data sets. And so this really lets people build out quite a complex and scalable model. from just that single core. But this doesn't stop very small organizations. Our smallest organization or smallest customer is a plastics factory, and they have 15, 20 staff. And all they needed was a very simple handover application between shifts. They're running 20 machines. In fact, what happened was they came online. They basically did a couple of hours training, discovered how they could leverage the documentation. The son-in-law went off and built these half dozen forms, and now every night the shift workers hand over from one shift to another, taking photographs of the breakages and failures and what have you, whereas previously that was all being managed through email and spreadsheets and all the rest of it. So now they have a very simple control mechanism. So by spending, in the hundreds, not the thousands, and spending dollars a month rather than thousands of dollars, they now have their own control mechanism where they can go around with their iPad, take photos, do a shift handover, and all the rest of it. So that's on the very small scale. So we see, scalability and capability to deliver from the smallest customer to the largest enterprise as a major achievement. Without that scalability, it really is not a very good reflection of the capability of the technology either.
Yeah. I love the story. I am curious about the revenue model. How do you bill?
Yeah, revenue model, that has been one of our greatest challenges. You set up a business and you set up technology, and the technology appears to be the hardest thing, and then you try and go to market, and then you suddenly discover that there's a real connection between. And if you have a platform like what we're achieving, is the flexibility of the platform then requires flexibility and scalability of your pricing model. So that has actually been a major challenge, but we believe we've overcome this, and we've actually followed the MongoDB Atlas model and the AWS, the sort of provision of horsepower, because we inherently are, on one end we are a platform, and we're basically providing CPU for or capability, CPU power for the application itself. This is what we're going to be moving to, or where we are moving to, is a processor-based charge. In fact, when we fully release it, and we're just finishing our testing on it, is the ability to we have a dynamic, we have a serverless environment where the servers do shut down on no activity. So it'll be truly pay as you go environment. So as I try and attach to a Formbird URL, whether it be your own URL or Formbird specific URL, the reverse proxy detects whether or not the server's up. It'll then fire it up. We were able to fire up the server within about 12 seconds. The user then gets access, and then, like a normal PC or whatever, after 2 or 3 hours of inactivity, depending on your configuration, it'll actually shut down. So we'll be charging a cents per hour. So it'll be sort of the traditional 30 cents, 50 cents per hour. So if you only use 1 hour a week, well, your server's costing you 50 cents a week. On the other end, our applications are then sold based on the market of the application. So, for instance, our fleet application, it's marketed on a pure SaaS. So it's actually based on a per asset price. So we market it as we do against any of our competitors, and we market that as a SaaS application. So moving eventually, looking well into the future, our future state is that we'll actually then be providing that whole billing process for other people, other customers or partners who want to build Formbird applications as vertical market applications, and run their billing model as well for them. So we have a number of small partners who are building applications. They really don't want to go through the whole, the whole billing process, the whole full SaaS end to end. They just want to build a little application that they'll go off and sell. So therefore, they'll come along, they'll fire up a Formbird. Well, first they go to MongoDB Atlas. They subscribe there. They might get the free tier. They load a free tier Formbird, build their application, and then launch off from there. So really, we're scaling from a processor-based charge, and the number of cores or processes are basically about the number of threads, the node threads or node processors. Our largest customers, 300-400 users, are typically running, say, 4 threads or four node processors. And then they just pay per hour for that. So really, we believe it'll be an incredibly scalable model, particularly with that shutdown and availability, on-demand availability, really means that customers will be truly pay as you go. And that will really give us scalability within our own infrastructure, and not have thousands of servers sitting there for 2 hours a week of effort. So from an environmental point of view, from everything point of view, it's a real positive.
This has been a great discussion. I think we're just about at time. I want to give you the opportunity to let the listeners know, how do they get more information about Formbird? Is there a URL or social media that you want to share?
I think the best place is just to head over to formbird.com, or just straight up Google Formbird, Formbird, and you'll see us there. There's a number of contact links and free starts, and if you keep an eye out, we will have our self-service environment coming up. It's still a couple of months away, but well on its way. And if people are interested in firing up an environment, a free environment, that's not a problem. Just get in contact with us, jump on there, register, and we can throw you up something. There's a ton of documentation. If you head over to the documentation in there, you should be able to really get started. There's also a demo environment where you can register yourself as a user and create your own form within minutes. So that can give you a quick taste of it.
Well, Mark, I want to thank you for spending time with us. This has been a great conversation. I'm really excited to dive in and take a closer look at Formbird.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Have a question or a suggestion for the show? Visit us in the MongoDB community forums at community.mongodb.com.